Hello and a very warm welcome to Titanic Echoes TV with me, Mike Prince. The other day I was privileged to meet a brother and a sister from Michigan who are descendants of the Davies family. This family, originally from West Bromwich, an industrial town in the Midlands of England, had plans to move to the United States. Sadly, some of those family members travelled on the Titanic. 4 men were lost on the Titanic from that one family, including 3 brothers. Those 3 brothers had a younger sibling, his name was Arthur, and he travelled a year later on another ship. So our special guest will tell us more about their story shortly, but first to set the scene properly, here's our resident Titanic expert, Andrew Loud. Andrew.
Well, one of the great stories about the Titanic, and certainly the Titanic connection with the Midlands, is the Davies family from West Bromwich. Famous town in the best of cases anyway. Great workers in the Black Country. Workers from the Black Country were being sought out by the United States. The United States had a lack of highly skilled labour, and they were desperate to get the skilled labour from Birmingham and the Black Country. And the Davies family, which had been working in the Black Country, saw an opportunity, and the family was there very happily, and you had William Davies had went over to the United States looking to find the opportunities, and actually found very good opportunities. And from that, he was encouraging the rest of the family to go over there, encouraging his brothers, and then to bring, of course, their families over as well, so that the whole family would leave West Bromwich and go to the United States to set up. And Julie, that's what he did. He was very successful. He came back, and 3 of his brothers in the UK were encouraged to go, and the beauty of this encouragement to go was the fact they ended up on the Titanic. They weren't aiming for the Titanic, and again, this is where the story takes one of these great twists. They were aiming for other ships. Lusitania wasn't available, other ships weren't available, and that was basically because of the coal strike in Britain, which meant there was a lot of ships either not sailing or had been booked up too early. So by a fluke, 3 brothers ended up on the Titanic, and they also went with their uncle, of course, we shouldn't forget him, James Lester, to show you this whole concept of families going over to the United States. And of course, one of them, Alfred, was married 2 days before the sailing of the Titanic. Right? We still have details of that marriage here with the marriage certificate showing that he got married on April the 8th to Anne Maria Cartwright, and they got married at the parish church at Oldbury just 2 days before sailing. Of course, he leaves his wife behind and will travel to the United States, and then when they're settled, they will send back for their siblings, for his wife and their parents to go over and start a new life in the United States. And of course, tragedy struck, and sadly they went down on the ship. But the families, of course, remained for a short period of time in the United Kingdom, where eventually they would travel and make that journey to the United States.
Thank you, Andrew, and there'll be more from Andrew Loud later on in this conversation. Now let's meet the daughter of Arthur Davies. Her name is Cheryl Davies Lewandowski, and I began by asking her how old she was when she first heard about her connection to the Titanic disaster.
Probably like 5 years old. I mean, we didn't talk about it since my father was the youngest of the 9 kids, and then he didn't get married till he was 45. There's just a large age gap, and nobody talked about it at all. But A Night to Remember was a Titanic movie that came out in 1958, so I would have been 5 at the time. And then it was on television. I can't really tell you when, but we were not even teenagers, and my father said, "Oh, well, I lost 3 brothers and an uncle on the Titanic." And we were like, oh, I mean, it didn't really mean a lot to us because we didn't understand being that young, but that's the first that we knew of it.
So when did Arthur Davies open up and tell the full story of how his older brothers went down with the Titanic? And I put this question to Cheryl's brother, Gary.
It was more or less a drip feed knowledge over the years. My dad really didn't like talking about it all that much, as far as I could recall. and that was about it.
But survivors did, especially male survivors, wouldn't talk about it because there was survivor's guilt, which was there. But families themselves who lost people also didn't talk about it. It's not like today where everybody sort of vents everything out about what's happened. They didn't in those days, and very few families actually were aware that any connections they had with the Titanic until very much later. I mean, in this particular case, it's quite interesting where we've got Arthur, the surviving brother, who came over afterwards, of course, after the event, and their children finding out. In many cases, it could even be another generation on before people ever found out. People just didn't discuss these things in those days. So this is a very normal sort of state of affairs with the Titanic.
As the years went by, Cheryl and Gary heard more and more about why their family had decided to leave England and move to America. Here's Cheryl.
Well, they followed through with the plan. I mean, as Andrew had said, William Thomas came over to the States as a brick mason to help rebuild San Francisco after the earthquake and fire in 1906. He married a gal in the States in 1908 and had a child. The first child was 1 year old, and he came back to England at Christmas time, 1911, just to tell the family, you need to come to the States. There's work there, because that's when the coal strike was. So he went back. William went back with his other brother, Richard. The two of them went to America, and then the rest of them were to come on the Titanic, the three brothers first, and then send for the rest of the family after they earned some money. I didn't know about that Titanic relief fund, but that must have helped them to come over, because then my father, his two sisters, and parents came over in 1913. So a year later, the rest of the family came over.
So what was the magnet that was attracting the Davies family and many, many more people from around the world during the 19th and the early part of the 20th century to the United States and Canada? Here's Andrew Land again.
The United States, the land of opportunity. It's almost like a catchphrase which has been used, but actually it's very true. It was a land of opportunity. You had more chance of progression in the United States than it did in the United Kingdom for a variety of reasons. And we see this a lot. And in fact, the Davises are a good example of this. We see this a lot with people who did survive the Titanic, for example. Those that survived the Titanic and decided to go back to England, and we looked at how they succeeded compared to those who stayed in the United States. And those who stayed in the United States did better than those that actually returned to Britain. So America was simply a land of opportunity. We had a glut of skills in the UK, which was a problem. So jobs were not actually as easy to get come by, and if you did move, the wages weren't good. Whereas in the United States, which lacked high skilled labour and high motivation from the Europeans, which were very motivated, they could make a fortune, but make a good life for themselves in the United States. So it was far more opportunities and ability for your abilities in the United States than you could get in Europe.
Cheryl and Gary are proud American citizens thanks to their grandparents' generation and, of course, their father. Here's Cheryl to tell us more about her dad. 6
or 7 years old. So he was the only surviving male that was with the family. The other two brothers were involved with their families and doing their work. So he ended up, he had to take care of his mother, his sister. He dropped out of school at age 14 to support the family because his father, he was, I think, in his 60s and couldn't work anymore. So he went into brick masonry. He built his first house when he was 16. And then he went on to become a foreman and a superintendent for many construction companies, Cunningham and Limp. He worked for them in the local area. So he was taking care of his mother until she was 90-some years old. He didn't get married till he was 45. He ended up having to take care of his sister Gladys. He was her guardian because her husband died and she had a nervous breakdown. So he was taking care of all these people. So there was just, like I said, a large age gap, and my brother and I didn't really know anything about all of this. So we just got word of mouth about everything. William, after he was in San Francisco, he settled in Pontiac, and that's where he wanted the family to come because it was the beginning of the auto industry. There were a lot of factories. There was a lot of work and a lot of good wages. And so even our distant cousins are still all in this Pontiac area. We've all stayed in the same area. And when I was talking with my cousin in England, John Willis, it seems like all of the family that remained all stayed in that same Sedgley, Dudley, West Bromwich area. So it's funny that both families stayed where they originally were from.
Well, the Davies family are now quite a clan across Michigan. But have they been back to England to discover their roots?
Yes, I've been there 3 times. My brother came the one time with me where we met Andrew before his book launch. And Andrew's just been a great part in providing us information that, I mean, all the family was deceased already, and he was able to dig up a lot of information for us, so it was very helpful.
Links across the pond with Davies relatives in Michigan and in Sedgley, Dudley, and West Bromwich in England. I asked Gary if he was rather pleased that his dad had emigrated to America a year after the disaster, of course, in 1913.
I'm more or less glad that I'm in the U.S.
Yeah. Gary Davies there with a very honest reply and flying the flag for the United States. Well, my thanks to Cheryl and to Gary for telling us their story. And of course to Andrew Lound, who made the introduction. Thank you, Andrew. And that's all for now from Titanic Echoes TV. We'll see you again soon.